Okay, we're talking about gender. In this video, we're going to talk about gender inequality. We've seen that gender is socially produced, it's socially constructed, it's not written into the laws of nature, but is in fact a cultural script that tells us how boys and girls, men and women should act and behave and think and feel and express themselves, right? All of that is socially produced. All of that is sort of bound up with those scripts that tell us, that generate expectations for how we're going to behave. But so what? Why does this matter? It's not the case that this doesn't mean gender is not real, right? But gender is in fact very real and has very real consequences. That is to say, it's socially real and therefore has very important consequences. So we're going to take a look at some of those consequences in this video. We're going to think about gender as a stratification system, as a hierarchy in which men capture greater resources, have more power and control than do women. So how could we actually see that? Let's think about what kinds of resources we could be looking at. We're going to focus on the gender wage gap, or the gender pay gap as it's sometimes called. So what I've got here is some data just showing us what that gap looks like, where we can see the gap between men and women, where women are earning less on average than are men in every racial and ethnic group, though this is notably larger for Black women and Hispanic women. But for every racial and ethnic group, men tend to out-earn women. So I focused here on the hourly wage of men and women, and this does something really important. Part of the gender wage gap is driven by the fact that men tend to work more hours than do women. So if we can just focus on the hourly wage gap, we can remove that effect. So if this was just about men working more hours than women, what we would see is that that the hourly wage gap would be close to zero. But in fact, there is a substantial wage penalty even when we account for the fact that men tend to work more hours than women. For white women, they earn on average $4 less per hour than do men. For Black women, about $7.30. For Hispanic women, $8.91, and Asian American women, $2.15. Right? So for every racial ethnic group, we see that women earn less than men, have a lower hourly wage than do men. So the question then is why? Why is this the case? What is producing this gender pay gap? Again, it can't be about the hours that men and women work, because this is accounting for that, looking at the hourly wage rate. So what is then causing the pay gap? Well, there's two possibilities we can consider here. One is what we call within job inequality, and the other is what we call between job inequality. Within job inequality would be a case where men and women are doing the same job, but men are getting paid more for that same job than are women. That is, men and women would be working in the same job but be paid differently. This is kind of the standard pay discrimination account, that women are paid less for the same job as men. Now, this was in fact very, very common, especially in before the 1970s. But this has become less and less prominent over time, and most of the gender wage gap today is really driven by the fact that men and women tend to work in different jobs. And this is what we call between job inequality. Men tend to work in jobs where that pay more than the jobs that women tend to work in. And we call this job segregation. So you can take a look at that here. 65% of physicians and surgeons are men, 35% are women. Right? So in the healthcare field, 65% of physicians are men, 35% are women. Take a look at registered nurses. About 10% of all registered nurses are men. So this is a very female-dominated job. It's the kind of job that while more and more men are entering into it, it is still sort of typed as a female job. This is even starker when we look at dentists versus dental hygienists. Right? So if you think about dentists versus dental hygienists, dentists about just under 70% of dentists are men, whereas 98% of dental hygienists are women. So if we're thinking about a division of labor in a hospital, physicians are more likely to be men, nurses more likely to be women. If we're thinking about a division of labor in a dental office, dentists are more likely to be men, dental hygienists are far more likely to be women. So men and women, even when they're in the same broad field, let's say healthcare, tend to work in different jobs. And it gets even more detailed than that. So when we can drill down to the specific kinds of, let's say, physicians we're talking about, general practitioners tend to be women. Those are dominated by women, whereas things like neurosurgeons tend to be dominated by men. So even at the level of specialization within these broad occupational classifications, we see even more job segregation than these classifications allude to. All right, so what this suggests is that the pay gap that we're observing is really most primarily driven by the fact that men and women tend to work in different jobs. That the fact that there is this gendered job segregation. That's what is really driving the gender wage gap that we're talking about. And so the gender pay gap question is really a question that pushes us back into another question, which is why do men and women tend to work in different jobs? What is driving job segregation? Job segregation is the thing that is driving the gender wage gap. So really, to understand the gender wage gap, we have to figure out what is driving gender job segregation. So I'm going to leave you with that question to ponder and think about and investigate a little bit further. Talk to you guys later.